Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar for today. You are here to listen to Peter, and he will be presenting on a good data manager is hard to find. All right, Peter's going to get started, and just to let everyone know, we've got some time. If you during the presentation want to use your raise your hand feature, and then we'll go ahead and unmute you, and you can ask a question, or feel free to just type one in, and I will get it passed along. So let's go ahead and get started.
Great, thank you. Well, hello everybody, and here's the agenda for today. I'm going to briefly introduce myself so you know who I am and where I'm coming from with this presentation. Just want to make sure that we're all on the same page by asking the question, what is a data manager? Then we'll talk about some of the problems in hiring and retention of good quality or great quality database or data managers. And then we'll talk about the solutions to those challenges. And we'll wrap up with some discussion on whatever questions you have, or if you'd like to share some of your own challenges that you've experienced in this area. So a little bit about me. My name is Peter Miras. I'm a partner at Build Consulting. Build specializes in helping nonprofits with their technology transformation projects. In fact, that's all that we do. And that can range from providing part-time CIO services to working on technology or data roadmap projects to performing implementation, system selection and implementation projects. And we also do some data management outsourcing. So I've been working with nonprofits for over 15 years, and it's been a great experience. And so it's very pleasant to be here with you today presenting on the subject. So one of the largest challenges facing our clients is hiring and retaining excellent data managers. And why is this a problem? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Primarily, I'm sure there are many that you can think of, but the primary one is that lack of good data management is a huge source of inefficiencies in nonprofit organizations, and that impacts everything from fundraising to program outcome reporting and everything in between. So when your data operations aren't humming properly, particularly in today's data-thirsty nonprofit environments and funder environments, you have a real problem. So the press defined really great high quality database manager skills is really at a premium. And when you lose a good database manager once you have one, it can be a major disruption to organizational operations, particularly if you aren't able to quickly find an equally high quality replacement. So in a nutshell, those are the challenges. I mean, we're increasingly data driven in our organizations, and not being able to manage that data effectively introduces a challenge. So again, inefficiencies, operational disruption, and just lessened impact or diminished outcomes. You know, if you're running a program and the program that can't get the data that it needs or can't get reliable data to inform its practices or to report to funders, then that becomes a problem. And I've seen clients in this situation even lose funding or have, less catastrophic issues relating from not having or losing a great data manager. So what is a database manager? I get this question a lot. I prefer the term data manager. I think it conveys a little bit more. You can tell from doing search engine optimization around related terms that database manager is the more frequently used when recruiting for related positions, which is why I've used the term database manager in this presentation. And in a nutshell, it's someone with the business and technical skills to navigate the complexities of their organization and the database systems that support the organization's activities. So I'm not thinking here about somebody that does data entry or routine data tasks, simple imports, exports, reporting, things like that. I'm talking about a true data manager, someone that's capable of thinking with the mind of the organization and with the mind of the technology, and putting the two together to help deliver impact. So I mentioned there's other titles. Data manager is one that I prefer. Database administrator is one that you might see. Information systems manager, information manager, and so on. So often these are prefaced when you are recruiting or looking at position titles by the department or the major system with which they're associated. So you might see, an accounting data manager or data analyst, or a Razor's Edge data manager, or so forth. So to me, all of these have nuances to them. They could convey different things, but for the purpose of this conversation, we just want to standardize around this definition so you get a clear idea of what I'm talking about here. Someone that isn't playing a bit part, is really playing a linchpin role in the operations of the organization and helping it to think better strategically from a data management standpoint. So what are some of the desired outcomes for the database manager role? And I would say that this is the primary outcome. You want to bring the data of the organization closer to providing an accurate and accessible representation of activities and outcomes. A lot of what we do when we come into organizations is helping them to make sense of their data and trust their data. Maybe they already have a great system in which to manage their data, but either they're not using it properly, or data entry isn't performed with consistency, or reports are run without full disclosure of the criteria that are involved, and it makes it difficult for people to trust the data. And people want to trust that the data is representative of what it's doing as an organization. So making that picture accurate and accessible is really the desired outcome for the data manager role above all others. And here are some of the primary focus areas of the role. Obviously, you have to establish good policies and practices to have a great data management operation. Project task management, just making sure that both the routine and the ad hoc requests that are placed on the role are properly attended to. And as necessary, delegating tasks or creating the right collaborative relationships with other departments by which to get things done. Process documentation and improvement is a major role. We'll cycle back to that a little bit later. And data quality and accessibility, making sure that that picture is accurate and accessible. And obviously, there's a lot of information systems implementations and integrations work. So for example, you might be doing something like trying to make your gifts management system post data across to your financial system. That could be an integration. If you're implementing a new CRM system or a new accounting system, that's an implementation. So you could add other things to this list, certainly. But these are the things that I've chosen to focus on, these high priority areas of focus. Brittany, do we have any questions before we move forward?
Not right now.
Great. Feel free to chime in with your questions, anyone. I know this is kind of primer material, but don't hesitate to ask a question. So let's talk about some of the hiring difficulties for a good database manager. First, the fact is that there's just not enough talent to go around. There aren't that many database managers with the skills, experience, and judgment to thrive in today's nonprofit environments. There's increasingly strenuous demands being placed on the role. It involves you to be able to do and think at a high level. And it's a challenge to find that person that's capable of meeting those needs for your organization. One thing that we've seen is that nonprofits chronically undervalue the role. So they expect their database manager to perform at a high level, as I just said, but they often don't mirror that expectation with the right support and the right compensation. So when you are competing in a talent thin environment, you really can't go to the market with with a low value placed on that role, because that's a huge challenge. And finally, just a poor hiring process. Nonprofits often don't know how to express what the job really entails, or they fail to recruit in the right places. So they often end up picking the best from among a group of less qualified candidates because they're not going about it the right way. And again, I'm going to cycle back to solutions in these areas in just a little bit here. So retention difficulties. The first two things to note under retention difficulties is what we just covered under the first 2 points in hiring, which is there's not enough talent to go around and it's often undervalued. So those same problems that create challenges for recruiting good talent also make it challenging to hold on to it. So if a good database manager finds an organization willing to value their skills at a higher level, they can move on, particularly since the role can be high stress. So the other thing is that organizations generally don't have a great understanding of what data management is. It's often, I say, the least understood part of the business, and sometimes the complexity of the role is overlooked. People like to think that data just sort of goes into the system and it flows through the reporting outcomes magically, and there's not really a lot that happens in the middle. And lack of insight into what the data manager does and the role leads to constant overtasking of database managers and unrealistic expectations, and that results in burnout, and that in turn results in not being able to retain data managers. So that's another challenge. And I would say that the third and most critical, perhaps, problem with retaining database managers is lack of support from the organization. So database managers are often held responsible for data quality, but typically they do not have the authority to enforce good data practices by others. And this can lead to database managers being blamed for data integrity problems over which they don't have any control. And I've seen this time and time again in organizations, even good organizations, where a department doesn't put its data in and then complains why there isn't any activity showing up for a particular reporting period, or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of challenges there, and unfortunately, it also leads to distrust when people don't understand what's going on under the hood. So in part, it's the data manager's responsibility, if they have the resources to do so, to educate their peers inside the organization as to what takes place, how the machine runs. But that also has to be predicated by strong support from the organization. So here's what you need to do if you want to have a great data manager at your organization, if you want to be able to find and keep one. The first thing you might want to consider doing is conducting an information management assessment, and we're going to get into what that looks like in a minute. It's important that organizations' leadership understand the proper function of information management and data within their organization and get a current best practice-based assessment of their practices. It doesn't have to be expensive. It can help create an environment in which an incoming database manager can thrive. And this helps with education and also helps with empowering the role. Second, you really need to learn how to approach the hiring process. You need to learn how to define and describe the database manager role for your specific needs, place the right value on the role, and recruit in the right places. And third, consider outsourcing the role, either on a temporary or full-time basis. There's a couple of reasons for that I'll get into in a little bit, but particularly small to mid-sized nonprofits may not require a full-time database manager to get the skills they most require. And in cases like that, outsourcing the database manager role can be a high-value, cost-effective solution. As I said, either on a temporary or permanent basis. In a temporary situation, you might want to bring somebody outsourced in that role to help do some critical sort of tuning or rebuilding of the processes and practices for data management, and then hire somebody into that newly improved environment instead of just hiring somebody right away. So there's some more value there that I'll talk about later on. But we're going to spend the most time on these first two items right here.
Peter, can I interrupt real quick
Yeah.
with a question?
Sure thing.
Okay. Let's see. At my organization, these tasks are split between several staff members, IT, marketing, and operations staff. What are the benefits of having just one person in this role?
That's a great question. I think that it's inevitable that the responsibilities are distributed across departments. So at a current client of mine, data management is really very much a shared practice by everyone, but particularly between development and information services, or IS. And so it's not really so much the benefits of having one person in the role, but making sure what the aspects of that role are and that their various aspects are filled by different people within the organization and that those parts are working together. If you have one person in the role that's dedicated, it can help sometimes in delimiting where one person's job description begins and another person starts. It can help to reinforce the priority placed on that role to the organization. If they're sufficiently resourced, they might be able to take the time to go out and do some networking and attend some conferences, which might not fit into the time abilities of a non-dedicated person, to help bring outside perspective in. And so there are a lot of different ways that you can shape it, but ultimately, whomever is in a dedicated role is going to have to be a great collaborator with the other departments. So there are pros and cons to doing it each way. Usually, I assess that on a per client basis. And I'm happy to take a more specific question about that via email follow-up, or maybe a follow-up question now or at the end of the presentation. So let's talk a little bit about information management assessments, because organizations that think technology will solve all of their ills, or that having even a new database manager will solve all of their data problems, is really setting themselves up for information management failure. Because good information management inclusive of data is born out of good culture. And successful nonprofit cultures focus on all 5 critical areas of information management, not just the technology. So these are the 5 keys to information management, and you'll see that data and technology are just 2 parts out of 5. So just to run through them real quickly, leadership, it's important for leadership to be engaged, set the vision and strategy, and make key decisions about information management. That's just all there is to it. In the absence of that, you're going to have challenges making and enforcing policies that will allow your data manager to thrive, because the whole organization will be on the same page instead of just one person at a mid-level position trying to crack the whip for everyone. Operations have to be well-resourced, and I'm referring here to information management operations. So you have to have the right people involved. That might mean making the commitment to having a full-time individual in the data manager role, somebody that can really be an asset to the different areas of the organization, whether it be marketing or development or different program areas, activists, what have you. Providing the project management and really emphasizing communications about how information flows and how it can be accessed. We all know that data doesn't just magically go into the system. There's data collection processes that have to be designed and documented and executed. And then for the data, you're gonna obviously collect it, organize it, maintain it, use it, and then technology really serves everything else. It's there to support leadership. It's there to provide support for operations. It's there to automate and support processes and allow you to manage data in the way that you see best. And the reason why I highlight these first three areas in blue is because you're really not going to get very far with data in all of its aspects or technology that helps to manage the data if you don't get the first three areas right. And so why do I show this to you? I think I'm showing it for a couple of different reasons. One, it's always good to remember that data management isn't just about these two areas of the process, the data and technology areas. It has to really become an institutional discipline for the organization that is properly resourced and has commitments associated with it. So, you know, the data manager really helps to acquaint leadership, who hopefully will have an attentive ear, to the various ways in which information and data can be used and what it requires in order to be used effectively. And to be able to communicate to that to them in clear, relatable terms. And then also being a driver of setting up good operations and working with the different parts of the organization to establish processes that are conducive to good data management. And then thinking about data and technology. So any data manager that comes into an organization is going to have to think back to here, even if they're only asked to operate in this space. And the more access and support they have at these three levels, the more, in the first three blue levels, the more success they're going to have here in these yellow spaces. So that's what I really want to communicate to you. Now, a lot of organizations need to have an expert. It could be part of the data manager's initial responsibility if they come at a high enough level, or they can outsource it, or maybe if they're of sufficient size and resource to have a director of information services or a CIO, really do an information management assessment that covers all of these areas to make sure that they're prepared for data management success. And that helps the data manager be successful in turn. Excuse me. So I just want to sit on that for a minute and see if anybody has any questions about the expectations that are placed on a data manager within the context of a framework like this. No? Okay. So let's get into the meat of what it takes to hire a good database manager. So typical nonprofits look at the process in these three ways. Can you fix my problem? Will you make my life easier? Do I enjoy you as a person? At the end of the day, that's what they're really looking for. And the problem is that the details inside of each of these areas are too muddy. There isn't enough clarity around what is expected of the role within the organizational dynamics that pertain to information management, which we just took a look at. So you can understand that a good data manager is going to need to know how they're going to relate to leadership. What kind of operational support and resources are they going to have? What do the business processes look like, and so forth? These are the questions that a good data manager is going to want to know before they step into a situation. So it has to be a little bit more fleshed out than this, and how can we do that? So excellent nonprofits really take the time to draw out the different aspects of what they're looking for when they're defining the position. So understanding and familiarity with specific challenges. Have you faced my kind of challenges before, or what have you done that's analogous to the challenges that I'm facing? How much familiarity do you have with them? What kinds of, to step down to, what kinds of solutions have you applied? How did you work with peers to accomplish that? What kind of technical knowledge or aptitude do we require, and how are we going to make sure that you have proficiencies in those areas? So those are things that you really need to tease out under the can you fix my problem category. And then under will you make my life easier, you want to have somebody that's outcomes oriented, not somebody that thrives on constant firefighting. You want them to have clear project management and clear communications. If they don't have the ability to do those things, which require you both to be able to think tactically and strategically, you're not going to have a good, successful data manager, and they're not going to make your life easier. So do I enjoy you as a person? You want both IQ and EQ. It's great to be able to analyze a data model and to be able to do business process analysis or re-engineering. And that goes a long way. But in addition to that, you need the ability to sit around the table with your peers and assess the emotional temperature in the room and treat everyone as an individual. And it's a rare person that has both skill sets. As I said, there's just not enough talent to go around. The reason you need to have both of these characteristics in your data manager is because change is hard. And a lot of what data managers do is try to influence their organizations to change their behavior for the purpose of being able to create that accurate and accessible picture. And if you ignore the change aspects and people's emotional temperature and the way that they needed to be related with as individuals, the infinitely more difficult the job becomes. So I also say team player on here. It's unfortunate that one of the top priorities of information services teams inside of organizations is delivering technology solutions fast enough to meet the needs of the organization, and the lowest priority is developing better relationships with other departments. So you have to be able to work on a team, and that team has to be you have to be capable of working with cross-functional people. You could be working with a data analyst on one hand and a creative director on the other. So you need to be able to work on teams with those different divergent agendas and personalities and bring them together. And boundaries. As a data manager, you're constantly in danger of being overwhelmed from a huge influx of requests and responsibilities. And you need to be able to set boundaries around expectations for responsiveness and how people need to supply requests to you, what kind of detail they have to provide. And you need to be able to decline, if at least temporarily, to work on something if somebody else has required something that's higher priority. And this goes along with being empowered by leadership to do this. You can create as many boundaries as you want, but if executives and everyone else tends to run roughshod over them, then you're not going to be in a great situation. So you need to be able to create those boundaries with the help of your executive superiors inside the organization. And part of being enjoyed as a person within this role is just to be calm in the midst of storms. If you're freaking out and snappy when there's a data-related deadline and you're encountering a few glitches, you're not going to last well at an organization or even in the data manager role successfully, because things are always going to come at you out of left field. There's somebody that needs a new piece of data that they've acquired, appended at the last minute. There's an algorithm change for a success metric. A third-party vendor didn't create an integration properly. There's always going to be something. So just for maintaining that calm, helping people to understand that their stress resonates with you, but yourself remaining calm is a key challenge of the position. So nonprofit organizations that really want to excel in this area and have great cultures recruit specifically and define the position so specifically as to make it attractive to a high quality candidate. And so these are just some of the things that are often overlooked, but can be a huge influence in how you conduct the recruiting process, from writing the job description to how you assess candidates, and whether you can tell whether you have a good pool of candidates to assess. So let's talk a little bit about compensation, because it's a key aspect of recruiting. You have to fix a level of compensation that you're wanting to invest in the position. And the first point here is expect to pay more than the average for the role. So the average is what somebody who's mediocre makes. You need more than mediocre for your organization if you want to be successful with this role. So expect prudently to budget more than the average, probably 1.2 or 1.3 times the average to really be able to pull in a highly qualified candidate. Too many nonprofit organizations assume that they're going to be able to get a discount from somebody that's mission identifies strongly with their mission or has other kinds of life priorities that the nonprofit might be able to accommodate in terms of a work-life balance. But it's dangerous to expect that going in. If you can get it, that's great. But you should assume that you're going to be, as I said, in the kind of recruiting environment that we're in right now, paying a little bit above average for total compensation on the role. And remember that total compensation is more than just salary. It's also benefits in all of their various shapes and forms. So you really want to be looking at that total compensation figure rather than just salary. Because you're in your recruiting process, you're competing for talent. So the second point is go ahead.
There's a quick question.
Sure.
What is a salary range to consider for a large U.S. city for an entry-level person?
For an entry-level person?
Correct.
Well, for an entry-level data manager, and I'll do some comparison on that in a minute. You can expect to pay for somebody that's going to be pretty good for you somewhere in the vicinity of $55,000 to $60,000 in the DC metropolitan area. And you can factor off of that based on your total cost of living. So, it might be more in certain areas of California, it might be less in certain areas of the Midwest, and might be more in the Northeast. So that depends on how you define entry level, but and I've certainly seen it lower than that. But again, to really get a good candidate that has a combination of skills that you want in order to excel and really be self-determined in that role, then you want to be in that range, I would think. That's a highly specific question to the region and what the competitive market is like. In DC area here, we have a lot of competition because it's like the nonprofit mecca out here. So there's not necessarily as rich of a talent pool relative to the number of nonprofits that are requiring it. So hope that answers the question. So the next point here is don't hire somebody with lower professional maturity. And what I mean by that is don't hire someone at a lower level and expect them to grow into a more mature role unless you are prepared to be responsible for training them and informing their maturation process. And what I mean by that is if you have a well-composed information services department that maybe has several people in it as opposed to just one person, and you have a director of IS or a CIO type person and a senior data manager that can help usher along somebody with lower professional maturity, that's great. They have to be disposed to do that, and you can hire somebody with lower maturity under those circumstances. And by professional maturity, I mean just a little bit less seasoned, maybe having the technical skills that you require, but not really having the time in the saddle in order to do more complex analysis and to make good business judgments about how they should do things. So those are the kinds of things that you want to think about. If you're going to hire somebody into a role, don't assume that they're going to magically self-develop themselves into being a more professionally mature individual unless you're prepared to oversee that transformation. And when it comes to compensation, consider the cost of a bad hire. So all things considered, the cost of a bad hire could be as much as 1.5 times the person's compensation. And what I mean by that is, let's just say that you're at a premium data manager position and you're spending $120,000 on the role, plus in total compensation, so salary plus benefits. You could end up spending $60,000 above that if you make a bad choice and have to go through the entire recruiting process again, plus undo any damage that they've done inside of the organization, et cetera. So I'm not saying bad hire in a pejorative sense. It doesn't mean that the person was a bad actor or doing things deliberately, maliciously, or anything like that. That's not what I want to convey by this. What I want to convey is that data managers are sort of the keeper of the keys in many respects. They are if there's lack of trust in the role, that by inference, there's lack of trust in the data. And once you lose lack of trust in the data within an organization, it is a hard thing to get back. And people start developing their own workarounds and shadow IT systems, meaning that they might start keeping the information in a spreadsheet where they have more direct hands-on control over the data. So, and it can take a long time to rebuild. So not only is re-recruiting expensive if you have to let somebody go because they didn't pan out in the position for whatever reason, it also is really expensive to rebuild those processes, those operational practices to restore trust in the data, to get data departments working functionally with the organization again. And I'm not necessarily talking about hard costs here, I'm talking about soft costs. If you have to let a data manager go and every department person that's co-responsible for data management is spending X number of hours more per week compensating for that person's absence, then that's a real cost to the organization. It's not something that a lot of nonprofits factor in, but it is a real cost because they're taking time away from producing outcomes to fill that role. So that's what I mean by a bad hire, just a choice that for whatever reason goes bad and results in a rehire. And I've seen the 1.5 times figure higher than that. I've seen it as high as 2 times, but I think 1.5 is a pretty accurate number when you take everything into consideration. So again, just to reiterate, you want to pay a little bit more than average for the role, maybe 1.2 or 1.3 times what the average might be. So if you can get sort of an average from public sources for publicly available information or from your peers in the industry as to what they're compensating a particular role at, you might want to at least budget for higher than that. And then, if you can find something that really works for you at a lower cost, you can chalk that up as savings. Again, you want to hire somebody that's really capable of filling the position on day one instead of taking an indeterminate amount of time to grow into the position unless you're in a position to help them with their professional development in that way. And just bear in mind the cost of, not doing things properly, not investing enough time or energy in the recruiting process from the start. We already talked about recruiting a little bit and everything sort of leading up to this. So as we discussed, you want to look for specific things. You want to define the position in specific terms. In the branding world, this would be described as making your brand so specific as to be appealing. And it's no much less true about recruiting. You have to really make the position that you're describing appealing. And part of the appealing is specificity, so that the person really knows what they're getting into, what's expected of them, what are the outcomes that are expected to be produced, who they're reporting to, what role does that person have within the organization, et cetera, et cetera. Communicate the role's level of empowerment. This is one of the things that I see missing most, and it's the hardest thing for a candidate to ask comfortably. So they want to know at the end of the day who in the organization is going to support them in their role and really either give them the authority or help them by providing another voice to make sure that data management is performed properly. So let's just say, how are you going to communicate this? Well, you would want to see the data manager reports to the IS director, who reports to the COO. The COO is responsible at the highest level for making sure the data management operates functionally for the entire organization. And even if you've already articulated that, you might get some follow-up questions. How much interaction am I going to have with these people? Does the rest of the organization understand and buy into the fact that the operations is the operational role inside the organization is setting the tone for data management for all of the other different departments? As you can imagine, as a candidate, it's really hard to ask those questions without seeming pushy. So to the extent possible, you really want to communicate while you're recruiting the role's level of empowerment. Because if it's not empowered, that's a red flag for top candidates. As I said before, they don't want to get themselves into that situation. And this might seem like a no-brainer to many of you if you've done recruiting in the nonprofit space before, but you know, I've had clients come to me and say, well, I posted this job on monster.com, or I posted it through ZipRecruiter, or whatever the situation might be, or I just put it on my own website. Make sure that you're out there in the community posting on nonprofit specific venues. You know, use idealist.org or a community message board. If you can't find someone in those locations in the nonprofit space, your odds of getting a good person decrease extremely rapidly after that. Because largely speaking, those are the places where people who are really tied into the nonprofit space are looking. And you know, it's good if you can get somebody that that is already employed and doing the very thing that you would want them to be doing for you. Yes, you might have to compensate them a little bit more to tease them out of their current position, but on the other hand, that helps reinforce that they have done good work before and that they're currently in demand elsewhere. And don't choose the best of several poor options. This is advice that I give to people when they're selecting information systems or database systems as well. If you don't think that you really have a good selection, don't just out of fatigue decide to choose the lesser of two evils or one of several poor options. You want to put yourself in a situation where you have several good candidates to choose from. And if you do things properly, you probably will. You might have to put more effort into beating the bushes to identify those candidates than you might like. But at the end of the day, as I said before, having somebody really good in this position is essential for a lot of organizations and can really be transformative. So make sure you put yourself in a position by taking care of all of the things that we've discussed previously to be able to choose between good options, or at least having one high quality candidate that you feel confident in, instead of saying, well, half of our department's like this person, the other half like this person, we're not really sure, but because we don't want to do this again, we're just gonna, you know, sort of throw a dart. And finally, consider outsourcing. And why outsource? Well, it's best for small to mid-sized organizations, as I suggested, especially if you want to do it on a permanent basis. So you might be able to have a successful internal data management practice with a junior data manager, an entry-level data manager, as somebody said earlier, or department staff, as somebody else raised, taking care of the routine data entry, the imports, exports, and reports, and then supplementing that by outsourcing the more senior data management responsibilities, which would be strategy, process analysis, integrations, complex data reporting and analysis, et cetera. So you can sort of build your team through a combination of insourcing or hiring and outsourcing. There are different ways to do that. And if your organization doesn't otherwise have a mechanism for bringing the information management viewpoint from other successful nonprofits into the organization, then outsourcing to a team or a firm that has multiple clients in this area might help you to bring that perspective in, especially if you've had somebody who's been carrying the torch for data management inside of your organization for a prolonged period of time, maybe 10 to 15 years. They're not really getting outside and networking with the community too much, but they're really good at sort of taking care of the routine data management tasks, which should be highly valued as well. I mean, consistently and religiously performing data management tasks is also a scarcity, believe it or not. You might be able to supplement that by bringing in some consistent outside support. And in addition to that, you might be able to get some packaged in CIO level experience, meaning that, you know, if you've ever outsourced network management to a managed services provider or an IT company, they might sort of bundle in some CTO type strategic expertise for that, either at the beginning or interspersed throughout, so they can stay on top of what your strategic needs are as an organization and help you to think about technology. The same thing is true when you're outsourcing data management services. Along with that sort of more practical hands-on viewpoint and maybe a little bit of strategy from a senior data manager type consultant, you can also get some CIO level, sort of high level exec perspective on how to address major organizational challenges that have data implications. And ultimately, if you're not going to be able to make information services or data management a core competency for your organization, as some organizations do with different functional areas of their business, they say, hey, we just really struggled with making IT a core competency, or we've really struggled with making marketing a core competency. We just don't feel like we're going to be able to do it at this point in our course of development, or maybe over the long term, and it's becoming a big distraction for us. Ultimately, outsourcing an area such as data management in part or in whole allows you to stay focused on constituents and outcomes and really the mission of your organization. So that ultimately is the benefit that you're going to be looking for if you decide to outsource. So those are some of the criteria that you should think about there. And that's really it, all that I plan to present today. I hope this has given you some insight into, again, some of the problems that face nonprofits in recruiting and retaining great quality database managers. And I hope it's given you some food for thought in terms of what kinds of things organizations need to take into consideration when they're thinking about the data manager role and what it takes to be successful within it, and how you can go about recruiting for that role and creating the right conditions for retaining someone after you find them. And with that, if there are any questions or any discussion points, I'm happy to get into it. We have 9 to 10 more minutes left, and I can also stay a little bit later for anybody that wants to continue the dialogue, or I'm happy to answer questions in confidence via email and follow up.
We do have one question that was just sent in. What is a career track a database manager would be interested in, and how might we retain them through professional development options?
Okay, great. I'm not sure exactly what is meant by career track. I'll give an anecdote from one of my clients, and the person who asked the question can let me know how close to the mark I am. So one of my clients has a structure as follows. They have a CFO who's responsible at a high level. That's the executive sponsor for information management and information systems. And then they have a senior data manager, and they have a junior data manager role. And the junior data manager really came in at an entry level, having not really very much prior experience with data management, except in a highly clerical way. But the organization wanted to see her grow, and they were resourced enough to be able to do that. And this person had an ambition to learn more, so it worked out well. And what they did was established a series of goals for this individual to become increasingly more knowledgeable and technically expert in their area, with a goal of helping them to grow into a more senior role, either with that organization or somewhere else. And those goals looked like getting certified in the information systems that were being used, such as getting certified as a Razor's Edge data manager, pursuing Illuminate Online certificate of training, and other systems as well as helping to expose them to critical areas of learning pertinent to organizational decision-making, problem solving, and also just the viewpoint of the industry, helping them to find ways to go to conferences like Blackbaud's conference, bbcon, or the Nonprofit Technology Conference, and really helping to mature them by being frequently exposed to what their colleagues in the field are doing. So that's a career track development path that was set up for this individual, and she was excelling with it when last I checked. The organization was able to put that in place for her, which is great. I provided a lot of input into that process. Ultimately, for someone that's looking to move all the way from the ground up to a senior high-level position, sort of as a director of data management or something like that inside of an organization, it can take so many different paths. I was an English major that started out in freelance graphic design, have since had many circuitous career paths and twists, ultimately ended up with nonprofit technology and doing a lot of work in that area. And now I am an information strategist. And people have lots of different paths through the nonprofit technology space. But there are people, not too many people actually, that come out of college and say, I want to be a senior data manager for a nonprofit organization. It's amazing, you know, where people start. Usually it's in some sort of department role, whether it's in marketing or business or development or a program, and they realize that they have an aptitude above all other people in the organization for really exporting data and analyzing it and helping people to understand how data flows and how processes impact the data. And they just became increasingly viewed as the problem solver when it came to data. And then they just decided that they wanted to do that full time. And if they weren't able to do that within their organization, they started building a resume that would allow them to do that either as a consultant or as a more senior staff member with another organization. So there's so many great stories I could share similar to that. But I hope anecdotally, at least, that was helpful in solving and answering the question. And I'm happy to, you know, be more specific in my response and follow-ups. Any other questions that I can answer for the audience? Or Brittany, do you have any natural questions that occurred to you?
I do not have any, and I'm not seeing any coming in. Did you include your email address or anything on one of the slides? Just in case anyone wants to reach out.
I forgot to put that final slide on, but for those who attended, I'm happy to have a follow-up email sent to them with my contact information. You can either do that, or if you send me the list, I'll be happy to send a little note out to everyone, letting them know where they can find me.
I will include that on a follow-up email.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for attending today. I hope you got a good value out of this presentation. I know it's going to be available as a recording on the Data Analysts for Social Good website. So if you have any points that you want to revisit, you'll be able to do it there. And do you know when about that will be available?
That should be available by tomorrow.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Peter. And for everyone else who's listening, just a reminder that we have a couple of more webinars coming up scheduled in May, specifically about the Justice Data Lab, knowledge mapping for greater social good, and getting started measuring your impact when there's no way you'll do an RCT. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. And thank you again, Peter.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.